On March 11, 2011, a powerful earthquake struck Fukushima, Japan. Then 45 minutes later caused a giant tsunami to hit the Fukushima Daiichi power plant. The devastation from the earthquake and the tsunami were immense, but pale in comparison to the damage that the nuclear radiation leaking from the Fukushima power plant is doing. The famous physicist Michio Kaku was interviewed by Nightline soon after the disaster. He said a meltdown was likely, and we were approaching the point of no return.
Should that Japanese reactor in fact melt down? Joining me, ABC News consultant, physics professor Michio Kaku. Professor, we've seen the helicopters dropping water on the site. If that doesn't work, what's next?
That helicopter dropping borated water is like a squirt gun trying to put out a forest fire. Too little, too late. I think we're extremely close now to the point of no return. Just a few more slight glitches, and we're going to be in an uncontrolled breach of containment. That is a Class 7 accident. That is a full-scale Chernobyl.
As it turns out, TEPCO, the company that owned the Fukushima power plant, lied and downplayed the severity of the problem. Meltdown did occur. In fact, there was 3 total meltdowns from the beginning. Michio Kaku did the following interview only a few months after the accident.
Thanks for joining us. Do they have control of the situation at the site?
No. It's still a ticking time bomb. Realize that after the big Sumatra tsunami, 90 days after, 3 months after that, there was a huge aftershock. If they have another aftershock, and they're not in cold shutdown yet till next year, the accident could start all over again. It's like hanging by your fingernails. Yeah, it's stable, but you're hanging by your fingernails.
Americans think this crisis is over, or that some even think that maybe it's solved or it's contained. It's not. What's happening right now?
In the last 2 weeks, everything we knew about that accident has been turned upside down. We were told 3 partial meltdowns, don't worry about it. Now we know it was 100% core melt in all 3 reactors. Radiation, minimal, that was released. Now we know it was comparable to the radiation at Chernobyl. And as far as evacuation, 12 miles, that's it. You don't have to evacuate beyond 12 miles. Now they find hotspots, 4 hotspots outside the evacuation zone. 34,000 school children now have radiation badges when they go to school.
Kindergartners with radiation badges.
Down to 4 years of age. Can you imagine that? Kindergarten kids with radiation badges going to school. So all the mythology of the accident has been turned upside down because utility has finally fessed up to how severe this accident really was.
Michio Kaku did this interview only a few months after the disaster, before we saw just how poorly Japan and TEPCO were handling the situation. Even back then, when some optimism still existed, Michio Kaku said the cleanup would last 50 to 100 years.
Year cleanup. How long will it take to clean this up in your view?
50 to 100 years.
And we're not there.
Michio Kaku also illustrates the kind of global danger that exists. He points out that we almost lost northern Japan in the initial accident.
100% core melt. What stopped the reactor accident at the time was the sudden influx of seawater. If they didn't put that seawater in at the right moment, we would have lost northern Japan. That's how close we came to a national, worldwide tragedy.
The fact is that although it could have been worse, Japan has been lost. The Japanese government is unable to deal with a problem of this magnitude. This is a screenshot of the website fukushima-diary.com. The website explains how the Japanese government raised the level of radiation allowed in food. Prior to the nuclear disaster, material with 100 becquerels per kilogram of cesium was stored in nuclear containment barrels. Now 100 becquerels per kilogram is the safety limit for food. Food is becoming radioactive. A grocery store in Seoul has a radiation detector, known as a Geiger counter, for their customers.
TEPCO only recently admitted contaminated groundwater is seeping into the Pacific Ocean every day, worrying those beyond the shores of Japan. This supermarket in the South Korean capital has provided a Geiger counter for customers so they can test the fish they're buying. They no longer import from Japan, but given the close proximity, some customers are still concerned. This Seoul resident says, "I buy fish here precisely because they have this radiation detector. But I don't really know if it's safe or not. I can only base my decisions on the labels."
The ocean is becoming radioactive and the animals are dying. In October 2013, a Canadian news outlet, the Vancouver Sun, reported that a $32 million commercial fishery had, quote, inexplicably and completely collapsed this year on the BC coast. The sardine fleet has gone home after failing to catch a single fish, end quote. Other animal populations such as starfish and seals are also collapsing. As much damage as the Fukushima nuclear plant is doing, it has the potential of doing much, much more.
The fuel core of Unit 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. More than 1,500 fuel rods sit in a damaged storage pool 30 metres above ground. Safely removing them is the next big challenge for the plant's owner, TEPCO.
These 1,500 rods pose an extreme danger and could cause a chain reaction with unbelievable consequences. In the next clip, Christina Consolo, founder of Nuked Radio, comments on the danger of these 1,500 fuel rods.
The reactor was under maintenance. So we have this full spent fuel pool that's sitting at the top of this reactor. And if something happened to that reactor and the pool fell onto the ground, the rods would start fissioning and possibly catch fire or explode. It could then start a chain reaction of the other spent fuel pools on site, the other nuclear fuel that's on site that's still left in the other reactor buildings, because there are 6 reactors at Fukushima. You only hear about 4, but there's actually 6 there.
And what would happen if a fire ignited in these fuel rods?
Well, we would be subjected to an extreme fallout situation where we would have to shelter indoors for a period of time, possibly a couple months, if not longer.
You're talking about worldwide?
For the Northern Hemisphere.
The Northern Hemisphere would have to go indoors for possibly several months?
Yes.
Christina Consolo was also interviewed by the news outlet Russia Today in an article titled Fukushima Apocalypse. When asked by Russia Today what the worst-case scenario was, she gave an honest answer. Quote, the worst-case scenario could play out in the death to billions of people. A true apocalypse. Since we have been discussing Reactor 4, I'll stick to that problem in particular, but also understand that a weather event, power outage, earthquake, tsunami, cooling system failure, or explosion and fire in any way, shape, or form at any location at the Fukushima site could cascade into an event of that magnitude as well. At any time following any of these possible events, or even all by itself, nuclear fuel in Reactor 4's pool could become critical, mostly because it will heat up the pool to a point where water will burn off and the zirconium cladding will catch fire when it is exposed to the air. This already happened at least once in this pool that we are aware of. It almost happened again recently after a rodent took out an electrical line and cooling was stopped for days. Once the integrity of the pool is compromised, that will likely lead to more criticalities, which can spread to other fuel. The heat from this reaction would weaken the structure further, which could then collapse the contents of the pool, end up in a pile of rubble on the ground. This would release an enormous amount of radioactivity, which Arnie Gunderson has referred to as a, quote, gamma shine event, without precedence, and Dr. Christopher Busby has deemed a, quote, open-air superreactor spectacular. Fukushima has the potential to destroy life on Earth. It is the ultimate catastrophe. As Japan's former ambassador to Switzerland pointed out, Fukushima is the ultimate catastrophe of the world and the planet.
Japan's former ambassador to Switzerland and anti-nuclear campaigner.
The Unit 4 contains 10 times more cesium-137 than Chernobyl. So in case the worst occurs, a total withdrawal will be imposed, which means this can be considered as the beginning of the ultimate catastrophe of the world and the planet.
Fukushima is the ultimate catastrophe. In fact, I believe it is the fulfillment of Christ's words in Matthew 24:22. And unless those days had been shortened, no flesh should be saved, but for the sake of the elect, those days shall be shortened. Matthew 24:22. It is only a matter of time before the fuel rods in Reactor 4 go critical. Between the typhoons and earthquakes that threaten Fukushima, it is inevitable. It is interesting that the earthquake that was the cause of the Fukushima meltdown also shortened the days of the Earth. That is to say, since the earthquake, Earth's days are slightly shorter. Here's a Space.com article reporting on the phenomenon. Is it a coincidence that the same earthquake that caused the Fukushima meltdown also caused the days to be shortened? I don't think so. I think it is a further indication that the Fukushima meltdown is the fulfillment of Matthew 24:22. The radiation leaking from the Fukushima power plant is doing. The famous physicist Michio Kaku was interviewed by Nightline soon after the disaster. He said a meltdown was likely, and we were approaching the point of no return.
Should that Japanese reactor in fact melt down?
Meltdown did occur. In fact, there was 3 total meltdowns from the beginning. Michio Kaku did the following interview only a few months after the accident.
Thanks for joining us. Do they have control of the situation at the site?
No. It's still a ticking time bomb. Realize that after the big Sumatra tsunami,
On March 11, 2011, a powerful earthquake struck Fukushima, Japan. Then 45 minutes later caused a giant tsunami to hit the Fukushima Daiichi power plant. The devastation from the earthquake and the tsunami were immense, but pale in comparison to the damage that the nuclear...
Joining me, ABC News consultant, physics professor Michio Kaku. Professor, we've seen the helicopters dropping water on the site. If that doesn't work, what's next?
that helicopter dropping borated water is like a squirt gun trying to put out a forest fire. Too little, too late. I think we're extremely close now to the point of no return. Just a few more slight glitches, and we're going to be in an uncontrolled breach of containment. That is a Class 7 accident. That is a full-scale Chernobyl.
As it turns out, TEPCO, the company that owned the Fukushima power plant, lied and downplayed the severity of the problem.